All right, I'm here with Jerry Liu, the CEO and co-founder of LlamaIndex, the popular library for doing retrieval augmentation with large language models. Jerry is quickly emerged as one of the leading experts in the field of working with large language models and getting them to be useful in productive applications. He comes from a background, I think you spent your whole career working on machine learning and AI related stuff, right, Jerry?
Yeah, thanks, Bayong. It's great to be here. I've spent most of my working career on different aspects of machine learning, from the ML engineering side to AI research, more on self-driving and computer vision, all the way to the ML ops space. So a little bit of everything so far.
Okay, awesome. So, I'm guessing a lot of people will know what LlamaIndex is already. It's gone from 0 to, I think, like 20,000 GitHub stars in the matter of, mere months this year. But for those who've been kind of living under a rock, or, who want a quick refresher, in your words, what is LlamaIndex?
Yeah, so LlamaIndex is a data framework for building LLM applications. The key mission that we have is enabling basically anyone to unlock the power of LLMs, whether it's question answering, summarization, planning, all these things on top of your own private data. So whether
Mhm.
you're an individual or an enterprise, everybody's going to have their own sources of data, whether it's notes or a database or images or audio files. And so the key question is, stuff like ChatGPT is amazing, but how can you really unlock all the capabilities on top of your own data? And a lot of that does relate to stuff like, data management, ingestion, as well as search and retrieval. So all these topics are things that we're very focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. And to answer, a question that must come up a lot, why not just throw all that private data into the language model itself? Throw that in as part of like training data, and then it should learn. Like it's quickly becoming AGI anyway. So why can't we just like throw all that into the model itself?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, to be honest, I think the jury's still actually out what the long-term solution is to everything. I think these days, there's basically two main paradigms of incorporating knowledge. One is fine-tuning, and then the other is you fix the model and you create this data pipeline, and we call it retrieval augmented generation.
Hmm.
So what you're talking about is more along like fine-tuning or training.
Yep.
I think one of the main barriers right now is cost, accessibility, and kind of like compute. You have to have like a powerful machine to actually fine tune a model. That does cost some amount of money, though it's getting cheaper. And then probably the biggest thing is no one really knows how to do it unless you're like a machine learning practitioner. And so I'm sure like some of these techniques will get better. But I think right now it's just way easier. Just take a model as is and then try to just feed data to it. And these days, toolkits like ours enable you to do that very, very easily.
Yeah. What you're saying actually resonates a lot with the approach that we've taken at SourceGraph. SourceGraph is a code search engine. It kind of exists to help human beings acquire context about code. And a lot of what we're doing right now is, I guess, under the umbrella of retrieval augmentation and combining, the large language models that can generate code, but also grounding them in actual search results that map to what the user is looking for. So, with that, I would love to kind of take a quick tour of the LlamaIndex code base with the help of Cody, our new AI coding assistant. So I'm going to share my
So
screen real quick. And the first thing I want to do is kind of ask Cody what is LlamaIndex, and kind of compare its answers to the answers that you just gave. And obviously, you're the expert here. You're the source of ground truth. So let's keep Cody honest. All right. So first thing I'll do is ask, what is LlamaIndex? So this is using retrieval augmentation underneath the hood. So it's going to fetch code snippets and snippets of documentation from the repository, uh, put those in the context window, and use those to complete its answer. So we can actually look at what files it's reading. It's reading a bunch of init.python files, some of your examples, and also some of the pieces of documentation in the README. So that looks good. Let's see what answer it produced. So Cody says LlamaIndex is a data framework for building LLM applications. Provides the following main features. Okay, so far so good. Data connectors to ingest various data sources. So APIs, PDFs, docs, SQL. Does that look good?
yeah, honestly, this is more detailed than my answer because I was just kind of talking about the high level mission statement, and this actually goes into the specific components of LlamaIndex. But yeah, exactly. As Cody said, LlamaIndex contains a few different components. There's like the data connectors, the ways to structure your data, as well as the query interface of your data too. And those are the three main components within the open source repository at the moment.
Awesome. Say more about this advanced query interface. That's interesting. The, my first impression is, with large language models, isn't the query interface just going to be like natural language? Like, why do we need a query interface to a system built on retrieval augmentation?
Yeah, so by query interface, we really mean both the current state of that naive state of retrieval augmented generation, as well as more sophisticated modes of interaction with your data to give you back a response.
Hmm.
Imagine you pass in an input prompt to this entire system, and this entire system is responsible for figuring out how do you actually manage the interactions between the language model and your data to give you back the knowledge augmented output. The most basic thing you do right now is you do retrieval once with like top K retrieval by embedding lookup. And
Hmm.
then you feed the retrieved chunks from your knowledge corpus into the LLM again, like once to basically synthesize the response. So that's like the naive state right now. And I think going from more basic forms of actually being able to query your data to more advanced forms of querying your data is what LlamaIndex enables, right, for different types of use cases. And so this accounts for instance, like multi-step interaction between your data and the language model, accounting for different types of data, like semi-structured, structured data, all those types of things. And also accounting for stuff like more agent-like interactions, where you can actually have some sort of outer decision loop, make automated decisions about what's like the best tools or data query tools to use to actually, serve the response.
Cool. I like that how there's this like ladder of ever growing kind of composition and complexity towards kind of like
Mhm.
I guess you might call it greater levels of intelligence or sophistication around answering user queries. I'm going to
Mhm.
start at kind of like ground zero. So I'm just going to ask Cody if it could use some of the context in this code base in your repository to generate just like a simple example. So, one of the things that are all the rage these days is like the PDF chatbot thing. I think
Mhm.
I've seen like about a dozen different tweets of like, hey, here's how you can use language models to turn any PDF into a Q&A bot so you don't have to read the whole thing. So I'm going to ask Cody, hey, can you generate a simple example of a PDF-based chatbot using Llama Index, and I'm going to instruct it to write code that actually works. This is a little bit, you need to kind of, this is a pro tip right now with working with language models. If you tell it to write good code, it actually affects the quality of the output. Uh, and I'll give it permission to write a longer example too, so it doesn't produce something that's overly trivial. And we'll see what it generates. Okay, so what do you think of this response? What's your kind of initial reaction here?
Gotcha. So it's not entirely correct, but I think it has the right idea.
Hmm.
I think first the PDF index and query engine and chatbot abstractions don't actually exist within our framework, but it has a rough idea. The first step is to load in PDF data, and the way you do that is through like a data loader on both within the repo as well as on Llama Hub. We have like 7 different PDF loaders on there, and so you do something like loader dot load data from the directory, and you load in the files. The
Hmm.
next step is you index this data. I think that's where I think the PDF index is trying to combine a little bit of both.
Yep.
But
Yep.
the idea is you index it, for instance, in a vector database with our vector store index. And then the next step is you create a query engine on top of this data.
Yep.
And the syntax is not completely right, but I think the idea is there, which is like you get a query engine over your existing index,
Yep.
and then you can chat over it. Um, yeah.
Cool.
So I think it, yeah, my guess is it's probably just not like being able to synthesize the relevant items from like the kind of like chatbot files, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of interesting. So it is going through some of the concepts like how to build a chat engine.
Yep.
Potentially, this might be on the model because I feel like it's fetching relatively relevant
Like these are
results.
good
Like some of
examples.
these, exactly, some of these tutorials are about how to build a chat engine. It's just not able to synthesize um, the final
Yeah.
response.
That's interesting. I wonder if it's like the IPython notebook format that might be giving it a little bit difficulty too,
Mhm.
because IPython notebooks are stored in JSON, and maybe it's more custom to just reading, like Python files or something like that. But this is something that we can definitely improve on. But it's good to hear that the context is decent. I was gonna ask you, if the context wasn't decent, like, if you had any kind of like tips for things we could look into, or maybe things that LlamaIndex does to help with the information retrieval aspect.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one potential tip here is that generally speaking, if the relevant context is not in your retrieve results, there's no way for the language model to actually synthesize the right response. And so you want to make sure your retrieval actually has high recall, right? Even if
Yeah.
the precision is a little bit lower.
Yep.
So I think in terms of maximizing higher recall, one tip is you could just try increasing the K value to basically see if it does like the semantic search matches like more relevant documents. The
Right.
other part is you can try to break down the existing question, which is, build a PDF based chatbot using LlamaIndex into sub questions. And somehow it needs to have context into what those sub questions are. But imagine you break this task down into, oh, how do I actually load in a PDF? How do I actually index a PDF? And how do I actually query a PDF? Those are all things that are relevant sub questions, and each of those could have their own retrieval mechanism. And so,
Hmm.
therefore, this actually kind of makes retrieval a bit more targeted to the relevant sub questions.
Yeah.
And as a result, you're able to get kind of like more targeted, relevant responses for each sub question.
Yeah. One other dimension of this debate, right now about like what's the best way to do information retrieval is, people comparing more like AI based retrieval mechanisms where, you compute the embedding, and do nearest neighbor search and embedding space versus more classical information retrieval
Mhm.
methods like keyword search or TF-IDF. Do you have a view on, what the right path there is? Is it one or the other, or is it some combination of the both?
I think probably some combination of both. It's just I don't have like a precise alpha value you can use to like tune it because I think that part I think is honestly domain specific.
Yeah.
To just like paint a general picture, semantic search is nice because it can basically embed relative meanings of things without exact keyword matching, and so that's quite nice.
Yeah.
Keyword search augmented with semantic search does help because semantic search tends to be low precision. It'll just return a bunch of stuff that's like potentially not completely relevant to your
Yep.
existing question. Keyword search will help narrow that by quite a bit, like by filtering down to the actual like relevant chunks that actually match the keywords or entities that you're looking for. So
Hmm.
that's why people are doing a little bit of both. I say in general, like to build a proper retrieval pipeline, you probably want to like do some sort of funnel. Like in the first stage, maximize for recall as opposed to precision. Try to
Hmm.
widen your net as much as possible, capture like everything that could be relevant in there, and then do some post processing or filtering afterwards.
Yeah.
And the filtering could be through like keyword search. It could be through some sort of re-ranking mechanism. And these days, there's a lot of interesting stuff, both around like traditional re-ranking methods as well as like LLM powered re-ranking methods, and eventually kind of like whittle the initial set down to a set of like relevant responses.
Yeah. I think that maps well to kind of where our mind has gone. So we are combining different retrieval mechanisms underneath the hood, and I think a lot of where we think the next phase of Cody is going to be is in that re-ranking stage, because that's where we have to integrate results from different sources and kind of compare the apples to the oranges and figure out what goes into kind of like the limited context window budget that
Mhm.
so I'm actually curious. I'm going to ask Cody, does Llama Index support different re-ranking methods?
You
Um,
might want to remove the space, which, oh, okay.
okay. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Doors.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I typed them as both
It doesn't
words.
matter. Yeah, that's cool.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Is this accurate?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. We actually don't have the BM25 or lexical rewrite yet, I think.
Hmm.
But that's a good idea. We should add that.
So it's some hallucination here. Get some things right, and
Hallucination, but like good suggestions. Yeah, we'll add that to the repo.
yeah, I've heard the term usefully wrong a lot as applied to the output of language models.
But we do have the LLM and code rewrite.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. Do you have a sense of like the different types of re-ranking and whether they're, better for specific domains? Like in your experience, what has been like if you were building like a simple search engine or something like that, let's say, in the realm of code, what would you reach for first?
That's a good question. To be honest, I don't have a great answer for that, especially in the realm of code. I would actually say code is one of the areas I'm like less familiar with. So just like I feel like there's a lot of complexity, native
Yeah.
complexity in how to handle like code and think about indexing it. In general, I think the default that I've been going for, which by the way is probably not the best answer, is just like trying to use LLM as like a second pass to try to like do some sort of re-rankering or cross encoding. So
Yeah.
the thing about like embedding lookup is um, like the like the context basically embedding doesn't have any awareness of the query, right? You basically determine the embeddings independently, and then you do a dot product. So
Yeah.
having some sort of like second stage pass, I can do compare like the query against the actual context and have a way of like checking whether or not this context is actually relevant to the query. It's pretty important,
Mm,
and LLMs is like a way of doing that. But that's the extent of what I've tried so far.
cool. Let's see. One other thing I want to try here is take a look at your issue tracker and see if Cody could help with resolving any of these issues. And so
Mhm.
this is kind of like, uh, hard mode a bit. I wouldn't expect it to work, well on all the issues, but let's see if there's anything that we might be able to solve. So I'm gonna pick a bug that looks uh, not too difficult, but also not completely trivial. So I'm gonna ask Cody, see if it can help with a bug. So I'm gonna paste in the title, paste in the description, and actually, this is a good example because here someone has actually outlined kind of a sketch of a solution. So we can compare the robot output to kind of the human output. So here, do it side by side. Okay. So our human expert said problem identification. The issue is identified in the selection output parser class of the LlamaIndex library. And it looks like Cody agrees in this case. Looks like the issue is the selection output parser expects output from the router query engine to be a JSON array, but in
Yeah.
this case, is that so? That looks right.
Um, I think so. Yeah.
Okay,
I It's
and
very
it
interesting.
looks
I
like
actually
the
haven't taken a close look at this bug yet, but it's yeah, so it expects like a JSON array or an object. There's the I guess it's also defined like a Marshall LLM to JSON method. The implementation is slightly different, but the idea is you can just like um yeah, basically you can just like find the relevant JSON string, and then you can it seems like in the JSON decoder, or like in the generated output, it's basically doing the same thing as what the implementation is doing, like looking for both curly brackets as well as um, it's
cool. So in this case, Cody actually did a like a pretty good job of sketching the solution. Like if you were a human developer going in and implementing a fix, would you call this like useful?
I think so. Yeah.
Scale
Yeah.
scale of 1 to 5. Be
Oh yeah.
honest.
4. I mean, this seems pretty related. Is that it for the answer? I'm trying to see what the AI generated answer is on the
Oh,
left.
yeah, that's it.
Cool.
We could
Yeah.
ask it to go into more detail. See what it says. Sometimes it goes off the rails if you ask it to elaborate too much. Oh yeah, this is complete garbage. Looks like it lost the thread of the conversation. Sometimes this happens.
It's-
I don't know if you've seen this with things that you build with LlamaIndex, but like you have a limited token budget. So every message you
Mhm.
gotta decide like what things that go into the context window. And so there's this trade-off between like previous messages in your kind of like chat transcript versus additional context you could fetch.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not sure how you guys implement it. I know there's some like basic implementations for storing memory. It could be in an index itself, or it could just be like a rolling buffer, or just like some fixed
Yeah.
number of lines. I actually think if we're talking about like future directions, that's actually one thing I'm very interested in is just like, we have these like indexes that operate over like static sources of data. It'd be
Yeah.
very cool to think about how do you like um, kind of have a memory index that can be suited for like dynamically changing sources of data like conversation history or
Yeah.
like any sort of like personalization data streams. So that, you can actually update these structures over time and you have efficient ways like looking at stuff that you've learned as well. Um, but the first response was pretty good. I was pretty impressed.
Cool. That's great to hear. That's music to my ears. One last thing I want to cover before I let you go is, LlamaIndex has it's really popular now. So like if you do a quick search of libraries that are using it, there's some really popular ones. Check this to repository space. Oh, sorry, I need to get rid of this filter. Okay, so these are kind of like the most popular libraries that are importing you. So looks like there's kind of like a Supabase integration. You mentioned the OpenAI cookbook. Um, there's some interesting projects. This MindsDB thing. Um, what are some of the coolest use cases that you've encountered? Like anything that has kind of like wowed you or surprised you in the way that people are using LlamaIndex to build on top of LLMs?
Yeah, totally. I think some of the core use cases are basically just like any sort of like analytics over your data, whether it's in the form of like a chatbot, QA, text to SQL, or just like some mix of both.
Hmm.
So I think that's to be fair, like that's one of the primary use cases that we solve.
Yep.
We try to do that very well. One of our entire like part of what we're trying to like message is the fact that the current retrieval augmented stack in its naive state doesn't work super well, and so there's actually a long tail complexity you need to solve and build like a really good QA or chatbot system over your data.
Yeah.
It's not surprising that a lot of the apps built are kind of these chatbots in different domains. You have like both like startups, for instance, or like hackers to startups to like larger companies incorporating some of our features, all the way from kind of like community driven projects like startups. Like I was talking to like SpringWorks, for instance, in India, they're building a tool called Albus, which is like a chatbot, or a Slack chatbot over your data. All the way to like a bigger company like Instabase, which is using our tool during like the document processing step. And
Yeah.
so I think we offer a rich set of tools in that area. In terms of like kind of like cooler things, I think these days one thing that we've started to like keep a bit of a closer eye on, and some people are using our toolkit for that is like stuff around agents, just like this idea of autonomous agents that can go off and
Yep.
do things. And so some of our contributors have built like cool demos on how do you use like LlamaIndex primitives to kind of build like cool agents.
Hmm.
There's another contributor that's building like a cool like medical insight analysis bot that's just like using our tools to try to like do medical research. I
Yeah.
think that's a promising future direction, but I think we've been a bit careful about how we think about it, just because um, we want to make sure that if we do this space of kind of like creating more unconstrained autonomous tools, that we do it well and that's reliable.
Yeah, that's important. I think reliability is a major issue. I guess with LLMs in general right now, but specifically like the longer the chains that you build, at least in our experience, the more difficult the reliability problem becomes. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. As the space evolves, in terms of LLM adjacent tooling, so tools for working with LLMs and composing them with other systems. How much do you think will become kind of like domain specific over time versus how much is going to be factored into kind of like a generic kernel? And what is that like boundary between like generic platform and domain specific things going to look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think some people have talked about this too, but I'm relatively aligned that like the future will probably be like multi agents, as in like there will be probably like general agents that are kind of orchestrators among different services, but
Hmm.
there will be like agents specialized at different tasks, and to some extent that's just like an easier problem to solve than trying to have like one thing literally capable of like doing anything. both
Yep.
in terms of like model size as well as just in terms of like handcrafting and evaluation and then just making sure you do these things. So for instance, like what do I concretely mean by that? Imagine you have like some sort of outer agent that's like maybe powered by GPT-4. You know, it knows when to hand off control to like a service that might have its own agents to execute stuff. And so if you
Mm,
like hand off control to like a SQL agent, for instance, then this like data analyst like SQL agent can like have a constrained set of tools to work with, for instance, like actually running like a SQL statement or fetching stuff from the database and
yep.
being able to execute that well. And that's just a lot easier for people to build in terms of like building constrained agents in these use cases. And then like, they could return this response to any agent that's using it, calling it as like a service. So, I guess it's similar to this idea of like microservices or just any sort of like API based interaction,
Yeah.
like, in computers basically. But like, I think there's a lot of interesting developments to be had in this idea of like defining the proper API interfaces in terms of communication between like agents, plugins, tools, and other agents.
Yeah. That's a pretty cool vision of the future. Agents talking to agents and kind of each agent scope to a particular domain that it's an expert in dealing with.
Exactly. There'll be more general ones and also kind of more specific ones.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I wish I could spend, a couple more hours talking with you, but it looks like we're close to the end of the time here. As kind of like a final parting thought, if folks are watching this and want to check out Llama Index, what's the best way to get started?
Yeah, I would check out the documentation and the GitHub. The quick start is super simple. It's just like 3 lines of code. Um, yeah, if you
Go
scroll
for it.
down, I think it
Yep.
should. There's like a README and there's like just pip install and you can just like do stuff there. So super easy. But I would say like we have kind of like a high level API as well as like lower level API. So once you're kind of like done with 3 lines of code and you want to actually customize and improve the results, you can go in and actually like kind of swap in like lower level modules to customize your experience.
Cool. Awesome. Go check out Llama Index. It's an awesome library. And thank you, Jerry, for taking the time to explain it with us and also check out Cody today.
Thank you, Ben.